Before we dive into this incredible story, make sure you're part of our journey. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and get ready for a story that will leave you thinking. And if you love inspiring tales, a like goes a long way. Your insurance has been denied, Mr. Parker. 5 words that shattered a father's world. The doctor's voice carried through the empty hospital corridor as James Parker clutched his son's medical file, fingers trembling against the paper. In the corner of the waiting room, a man in a black jacket looked up from his phone. St. Mary's Children's Hospital gleamed with antiseptic brightness, its evening quiet broken only by distant monitors and the muffled sobs of a desperate father. James stood frozen, his weathered work boots stark against the polished floor, his clothes bearing the marks of 3 jobs and still not enough. The doctor's eyes held genuine sympathy, but his words remained firm. Without $120,000, 7-year-old Ethan's heart surgery couldn't proceed. "Please," James whispered, his voice breaking. "He's all I have left." His shoulders collapsed under the weight of impossibility as he glanced toward the pediatric ward where his son waited, smiling, despite the tubes and monitors, still believing his father could fix anything. What James didn't notice was how the man in the corner slowly pocketed his phone, how his eyes never left the scene unfolding before him. If this moment made you feel something, imagine what's coming next. Hit that like button and stay with us. Subscribe now. James Parker spent the last 3 years moving heaven and earth for his son. Since losing his wife to cancer, he'd become both mother and father to Ethan, working double shifts at the construction site and moonlighting as a janitor. The rare congenital heart condition had appeared suddenly 6 months ago, deteriorating rapidly despite their best efforts. The specialists had been clear. Without this surgery, Ethan had months, maybe weeks. The doctor, Dr. Williams according to his name tag, shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Parker, I truly wish there was something else I could tell you." His voice lowered, genuinely pained. "We've exhausted every program, every charity option. Without payment, my hands are tied by hospital policy." James felt the world spinning around him. He'd sold their house, emptied his retirement account, even started a GoFundMe that barely made a dent. The community had helped where they could, but everyone was struggling in their small town. He pressed his calloused palm against the cold wall for support, wondering how he would tell Ethan that Daddy couldn't fix his heart after all. "Dad?" A small voice carried from down the hallway. Ethan had wheeled himself to the doorway of his room, his thin frame swallowed by the hospital gown, his face pale but eyes bright. "Is everything okay?" Even at 7, he could read his father's expressions better than anyone. James quickly wiped his eyes, forcing a smile that didn't reach them. "Everything's fine, buddy. Just grown-up stuff." The lie tasted bitter on his tongue. "Let's get you back to bed." Dr. Williams watched silently, the weight of the system he represented visibly heavy on his shoulders. 2 nurses at the station lowered their eyes, having witnessed this scene too many times before. The business of saving lives always collided harshly with the business of healthcare. In the corner, the man in the black jacket stood slowly. He was dressed simply: jeans, boots, a worn leather jacket, his long dark hair pulled back, beard slightly unkempt. Had anyone been paying attention, they might have recognized him, but grief has a way of blinding people to their surroundings. He moved quietly, almost hesitantly, across the polished floor. James knelt before his son's wheelchair, adjusting the thin blanket around Ethan's legs. "Race you back to your room? I bet they have that superhero movie playing again." His voice strained for normalcy, for the strength to carry them both through whatever came next. "Dad, are they going to fix my heart?" Ethan asked, his small hand reaching up to touch his father's stubbled cheek. The innocence of the question sliced through the hospital air like a scalpel. The question hung between them, suspended in time. James opened his mouth but found no words, only the crushing pressure of failure. This was a promise he couldn't keep, a monster he couldn't slay. "Excuse me." The voice was quiet but distinctly resonant, carrying a gentle authority that turned heads. The man from the corner now stood beside them, his presence somehow both commanding and humble. Dr. Williams looked up, recognition dawning in his eyes as the stranger approached. Even in the hospital's fluorescent lighting, there was no mistaking him now, Keanu Reeves. Though he carried himself without any celebrity pretense, things are about to take a turn. Don't miss what happens next. Subscribe, like our video, and keep watching. The hospital corridor seemed to freeze in a moment of collective disbelief. Nurses at the station straightened, whispering behind raised hands. A passing orderly nearly dropped his clipboard. Yet Keanu himself appeared oblivious to the effect his presence created, his focus entirely on the father and son before him. "I couldn't help overhearing," Keanu said, his voice carrying the same gentle cadence that had made him beloved both on and off screen. "I'd like to speak with you about your son's situation, if that's all right." James blinked, the surreal nature of the moment not quite registering. "I'm sorry, but do I know you?" Ethan tugged at his father's sleeve, eyes widening. "Dad, that's Neo, and John Wick." The boy's excitement momentarily overcame his weakness, bringing color to his pale cheeks. Keanu smiled at Ethan, then extended his hand to James. Keanu is fine." Dr. Williams stepped forward, professional composure barely containing his own surprise. "Mr. Reeves, I didn't realize you were visiting our hospital today. This is highly unusual, but I was here visiting some kids from the cancer ward," Keanu explained simply. "I like to do that without cameras sometimes. But right now, I'd like to understand what's happening with this young man's treatment." Dr. Williams hesitated, looking between James and Keanu. "I'm afraid I can't discuss patient details without—" "Please," James interrupted, desperation overriding his disbelief. "I give my permission." A drowning man doesn't question the hand that reaches for him, even if that hand belongs to a Hollywood star. Keanu nodded and gestured toward a small consultation room nearby. "Perhaps we could talk privately." His calm presence seemed to part the growing crowd of curious staff who had found sudden reasons to be in that particular corridor. Inside the small room, with Ethan happily distracted by a nurse who'd promised to show him where they kept the ice cream, Dr. Williams explained the situation clinically. The congenital heart defect, the specialized procedure, the insurance denial, the astronomical cost. "He's a fighter," James said, looking at his weathered hands. "Never complains, even on his worst days. Keeps telling me not to worry." His voice cracked. "How do you tell your kid you can't afford to save their life?" Keanu sat quietly, absorbing every word, his eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that went beyond sympathy. He asked thoughtful questions about Ethan's condition, the success rates, the recovery process. Not once did he interrupt with platitudes or empty reassurances. "I've been to 17 banks," James continued, the words pouring out now. "Sold everything worth selling. I've got about 30,000 saved up, but it's nowhere near enough." When James finished speaking, a heavy silence filled the room. Dr. Williams looked down at his clipboard, the professional distance he usually maintained visibly crumbling. Outside, the hospital continued its evening rhythm, unaware of the small drama unfolding in the consultation room. "May I ask why you've been visiting the cancer ward?" James finally asked, curiosity breaking through his grief. Something shifted in Keanu's expression. a shadow of old pain, quickly masked. "My sister fought leukemia for 10 years, he said simply. "I know what it's like to watch someone you love battle something you can't fight for them." The words hung in the air, creating an unexpected bridge between the wealthy actor and the struggling father. Not pity, but understanding. "What happens if we can't get the money?" Keanu asked Dr. Williams, his tone shifting subtly to something more focused. "We'll manage his condition medically, as long as possible," the doctor answered carefully. "But without the surgery—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Keanu nodded once, decision made though he hadn't yet voiced it. He pulled out his phone, glanced at the time, then looked directly at James. "I'd like to speak with Ethan, if that's okay." James blinked in surprise. "Of course, but why?" "Because," Keanu said, standing and straightening his jacket, "people who are fighting the hardest battles deserve to be seen for who they are, not just their struggles. This story is only getting deeper. What would you do in this situation? Comment below, and let's talk." Ethan's room was decorated with superhero posters and hand-drawn cards from classmates. His face lit up when Keanu walked in, tiny body practically vibrating with excitement despite the medical equipment surrounding his bed. "You're really him!" Ethan exclaimed, wide-eyed. "Dad, look! It's really him!" Keanu smiled, pulling up a chair beside the bed. "I hear you're quite the fighter," he said, speaking not with the condescension adults often use with children, but with genuine respect. "The doctors say I have a special heart," Ethan explained seriously. "Sometimes it doesn't work right, but Dad says we're going to fix it." James swallowed hard, the innocent trust in his son's voice almost unbearable. Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "Special hearts are rare. I'd like to hear more about yours." For the next 20 minutes, Keanu sat with Ethan, talking about superheroes and video games, asking about school and friends. Not once did he check his phone or watch, giving the boy his complete attention. The nurses passing by stared in disbelief, several taking furtive photos that would later circulate among the staff. "Can I tell you a secret?" Keanu finally asked, leaning closer to Ethan. The boy nodded eagerly. "I think the real superheroes are the ones in places like this." He gestured around the hospital room. "The ones who keep fighting even when it's hard." Ethan considered this with the seriousness only children can muster for philosophical questions. "But superheroes don't get scared," he finally said. "I get scared sometimes." "Can I tell you another secret?" Keanu's voice dropped conspiratorially. "Everyone gets scared. Bravery isn't about not feeling fear. It's about feeling it and still doing what needs to be done." From the doorway, James watched this exchange, a knot forming in his throat. This wasn't a celebrity photo opportunity or a publicity stunt. There were no cameras, no press, just genuine human connection. As their conversation wound down, Keanu asked to speak with James and Dr. Williams again. Back in the consultation room, his demeanor shifted, still gentle but with newfound purpose. "I'd like to cover Ethan's medical expenses," he said without preamble. "All of them." The pronouncement landed like a thunderclap in the small room. Dr. Williams blinked rapidly, professional composure momentarily abandoned. James stared, certain he'd misheard. "I don't understand," James managed, his voice barely audible. "It's simple," Keanu replied. "Your son needs this surgery. You've done everything possible to provide it. Let me help." There was no grandstanding in his offer, no hint that he expected gratitude or recognition. It was stated as plainly as someone offering to carry a heavy bag for a stranger. "I can't accept that," James said automatically. pride and shock warring in his voice. "It's too much. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars." Keanu didn't argue or try to persuade. Instead, he asked, "If our situations were reversed and you had the means to help my child, would you?" The question hung in the air, simple yet profound. "Of course I would. But then allow me the same privilege," Keanu said quietly. "Not because I'm an actor, or because I have money, but because I'm another human being who can help." Dr. Williams cleared his throat. "Mr. Reeves, while this is incredibly generous, there are protocols, paperwork." "I understand," Keanu nodded. "My foundation has experience with medical donations. We can handle the details discreetly." He turned to James. "Your job is to be there for Ethan." "That's all." James stood frozen, a lifetime of self-reliance making it almost impossible to accept such help. Yet the image of Ethan's trusting face, his absolute belief that his father would find a way, broke through that final barrier. "I don't know how to thank you," he finally whispered, voice raw with emotion. Keanu shook his head. "Don't thank me. Just be there for him." He glanced at his watch. "I should go. My assistant will contact the hospital tomorrow to arrange everything." He stood, offering his hand to James not as a celebrity to a fan, but as one father to another. "Ethan's a remarkable kid. The world needs his special heart. It's not over yet. The best part is coming. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it." Three days later, Ethan underwent his life-saving heart surgery. True to his word, Keanu's foundation handled everything quietly, with no press releases or public announcements. Dr. Williams, who had performed thousands of surgeries in his career, found himself unusually invested in this particular case, triple-checking every detail before they wheeled Ethan into the operating room. In the waiting room, James sat alone, turning a small wooden figure in his hands, a handmade superhero Ethan had crafted in art therapy. The hours stretched endlessly, each tick of the clock a reminder of how quickly life could change. From absolute despair to impossible hope in the span of a single evening. "Mr. Parker?" A nurse appeared, her face professionally neutral. "Doctor, Williams would like to speak with you." The walk to the consultation room felt like miles. James had lived through this moment in his nightmares countless times. The sympathetic doctor, the gentle voice explaining that they'd done everything they could. His legs could barely carry him. Dr. Williams looked up as he entered, surgical cap still on, eyes tired but bright. "The surgery was successful, Mr. Parker. Ethan's heart is already showing improved function. He's a fighter, just like you said." 2 weeks later, the hospital corridor that had once witnessed James's greatest despair now echoed with a very different sound. Ethan's laughter as he was wheeled toward the exit doors, officially discharged. Color had returned to his cheeks, and though recovery would be long, the shadow of imminent loss had lifted. The nurses from the pediatric ward lined up to say goodbye, many of them discreetly wiping away tears. One handed James a sealed envelope. "This came for Ethan yesterday," she explained. "Special delivery." Inside was a handwritten note and a small package. The note, written in a distinct, measured handwriting, read simply, "To Ethan, remember that special hearts see the world differently. That's their real power. Your friend, Keanu." The package contained a custom action figure, not of a movie character, but of Ethan himself, complete with a tiny scar on his chest and a cape emblazoned with "the real superhero." News of what had happened eventually leaked, as things inevitably do in the age of social media. A nurse's cousin told a friend who posted on Twitter, Yet when reporters contacted Keanu's representatives for confirmation, they received only a polite, "Mr. Reeves has no comment on private matters." 6 months later, a small community center hosted a fundraiser for families facing catastrophic medical costs. James Parker stood at a simple podium, no longer the broken man from the hospital corridor, but someone transformed by gratitude and purpose. "When my son was dying and every door had closed," he told the gathered crowd, "I learned that sometimes help comes from where you least expect it. Not because you deserve it or are entitled to it, but simply because another human being sees your pain and has the means to ease it." He didn't mention Keanu by name, respecting the actor's privacy just as his own had been respected. Instead, he spoke about the ripple effects of compassion, how one act of kindness had inspired him to start a foundation helping working families navigate the complexities of medical costs. Across town, in a quiet hotel room, Keanu Reeves scrolled through his phone, pausing on a photo sent by his assistant, Ethan, at his first day back at school, beaming with health and possibility. No caption was needed. The image itself was enough. He smiled and put the phone away, turning his attention back to his script. No interviews had been given, no publicity sought. Yet something more valuable than publicity had been gained. The quiet knowledge that sometimes the most important roles we play are the ones no one ever sees on screen. Wow, what a story! If this moved you, imagine what else we have for you. Hit that like button, drop a comment, and let us know what you think.